From a Hamilton sprint victory to a double disqualification in the actual race, let's just say the Tifosi were in for an emotional roller coaster in China. While the McLaren fans should be delighted with a 1-2 finish, we had Piastri taking it home. This is F1 Fridays, and let's get right into what I will call the Ferrari Fiasco. They showed amazing pace to begin the weekend in practice and then obviously in the sprint race. Now I think one of the biggest things is that the conditions were very different for the sprint race versus the actual race. The actual race being a bit overcast, so tire degradation was a lot different. We saw that the Ferraris heated up their tires fairly quickly, and I think that worked against them in the actual race. Now, amazing drive from Hamilton. I don't want to take anything away from him. He was far in front for that sprint race, and I think he really showed that he has it still. Obviously, we'll say it was his first Ferrari win. It is a sprint race, but props to him. Now, we move into the actual race day on Sunday. We had both Ferraris disqualified for two different reasons, as well as Gasly. Now, Charles Leclerc's and Gasly's reason were the same. The weight of the car did not comply with the minimum weight requirements at the end of the race. Basically, after the race, they weigh all the cars, and this is a bit of controversy if they should weigh the cars with the tires or without the tires. Because we kind of saw that some of the drivers on their in-laps after passing the start-finish line at the end of the race ran off. I think it was Lando that picked up some mud on the track, and then Max on pit entry decided to drive offline and pick up some mud as well. Supposedly this is to add some weight back on the tires, so when they weigh it, it does become legal, or just they make sure it's legal. It seems to be a sketchy thing. Who knows what's the reality within those actions, but the weight requirements are very strict and unfortunate for Leclerc and Gasly, in addition to the fact that Lewis Hamilton was disqualified for the thickness of his plank assembly being below the minimum thickness allowed. So basically, underneath these F1 cars, you have a wooden plank, and it kind of gets eaten throughout the race. It does very early, where the cars are filled with fuel, and there's a tolerance that they allow, which prevents cars from running too low to the ground, which gives competitive advantage sometimes. So Hamilton was also disqualified. It was a very, very rough day for Ferrari fans, especially after they got excited from that sprint win. To be honest, I'll throw some shade. Some people that I've never seen post like F1 posts on their stories, Hamilton win, you know, they threw up these Ferrari graphics. It was quite hilarious. I'll throw my shade there, and a bit of karma on the Sunday. But we move on. I hope they could bounce back. It's a bit of a shame because they had a decent performance overall in the weekend, and it all went to nothing. And we saw some of the other drivers obviously capitalize with that disqualification, Antonelli moving up, the Hasses moving up, etc. Now we get into the racing bulls. Strategic slip-ups. Now, there's a lot going on with both Racing Bulls and Red Bull, but I want to focus on the race first and how they messed it up. The Racing Bulls had great pace in the actual race. We saw Yuki and Hadjar running quite strong in the points, and for the most part, most people went into this race expecting it to be a two-stop strategy. However, when they went on those hard tires, they realized that it could have gone all the way, with George Russell being the first one to point that out. Now, I don't know if the Racing Bulls were just locked in their ways or had this predetermined notion that they needed to get back fresh tires. However, changing from hards to hards is not a great improvement in terms of pace and delta, and it should have been obvious that putting new hards, they weren't able to go and overtake the rest of the pack again. So they dropped out of the point after their second pit stop and couldn't catch back up. We also saw Yuki's front wing exploding, I guess. In the dirty air, just broke. And he had to go in for another pit stop, and that ruined his race absolutely. It's a shame, and I think that racing bulls right now are not capitalizing on the car that they have. They have amazing speed, and they've been messing it up. Now, this transitions into what has happened officially this morning. Lawson has been binned for Red Bull and is now heading back to Racing Bulls, while Yuki Tsunoda takes the Red Bull second seat. That dreaded seat of death. Now, it is a shame for all parties. I think Red Bull is in desperation mode. They realize that they don't have the car to fight up front, and also they have issues with the car that Max tended to cover up with his skill. So those second drivers, I think it shows how good Perez was, because Lawson is no slouch, and in his first two races he had Haas's overtaking him, and it was an absolute disaster. Now, for Lawson's confidence, I think it takes a big kick and a bit of a defeat for him. However, he does have an opportunity to kind of regain his form in the Racing Bulls, a car that he knows a lot better and seems to be a lot easier to drive. Now, also, it is rumored that Honda had a lot to play in Yuki getting the seat now. We know that they had a lot to play in his career overall, as well as last season trying to get him that seat. Red Bull did not put him in that seat, unfortunately, and then I think it was well deserved. And then Honda came again apparently to try to get him in before Japan. Obviously, marketing Yuki's home race is a big deal paired with Honda, so I think there was a bit of an influence there as well. And I also think that Red Bull realized that they have nothing really to lose with that second seat, because Lawson didn't seem to be scoring points anytime soon. It was a bit of a disaster, and Yuki was supposedly in line to leave the team within the next year or so if he wasn't given the opportunity. So I think it is what it is. Let's see if Yuki could score some points. First of all, we set expectations kind of low. Once I think he comes around 10th to 12th, it will be acceptable for those first few races. See if he could handle that car and the characteristics. Insanely difficult car to drive apparently, and I don't know. I'm excited. This is obviously, Yuki is one of my favorite drivers. I have Max in first, Lando in second, and Yuki third in terms of who are my favorite. And Piastri is moving up there because he seems to be a boss. But for the most part, let's hope Yuki does well, and I wish him all the best, and I hope Red Bull could get back into the thick of things and take advantage of those Ferrari mess-ups. We go to the team that hasn't really gone wrong so far for this season. Yes, Piastri had that moment in the first race in Australia, but I think he showed his true colors. Big up Oscar. He was in control for the entirety of the race, I would say. From that first corner, moving on forward, he seemed like the quickest car on track. He also seemed very composed. I think it shows that he does have championship winning qualities, and I think it could be a bit of an issue. Now, when McLaren took Piastri, I do think they believed he had those characteristics. However, I do think they expected it to show up a little bit later in his career. He is already showing that he could compete with Norris, if not be better than Norris on the right day. And for the most part, I think he seemed in this race to be the number one driver. Now, you could end up with an issue where there's two number one drivers vying for points, fighting for track position, and it turns into a disaster. It is a bit tricky to deal with that situation because you obviously want to maximize points, but you have to limit, basically limit them crashing into each other and ruining their own races. So I do think the team has to come in and do a lot and say who's their number one driver, at least for this season. They might give them a few more races to really see where that leads. If it is Lando they're running with and Piastri has to support, or vice versa, I don't think either driver has the mentality to give up that number one spot. Let's see. I do expect them to be strong moving forward. Again, they seem like the car to beat, and they are obviously coming in with these new regulations to minimize the wing flex, which I think will affect them a bit, but they seem to be above and beyond. I do want to mention also Mercedes, very strong performance from George Russell, Kimi Antonelli, driver of the day, which I don't think he deserved this week. He deserved it in Melbourne. That's a weird one. But props to George Russell for taking advantage, and obviously with the disqualifications for Ferrari, Mercedes were able to kind of move up in points. Let me get into fantasy. Now, I will say this week was back to our regularly scheduled programming, because the teams that we expected to do well in the beginning did horribly in Melbourne. But this week, I think it balanced itself out. As I said before, I told everyone not to panic with their teams, make minimal changes, more for budget increases. However, the drivers that did bad in week one aren't necessarily bad drivers. So I think with minimal disqualifications or DNFs, this should be kind of the meta build of moving with like McLaren. And you definitely want to have one or two of those assets at least. I do believe we have price reviews for Yuki and Lawson so far, but I don't want to say make any moves yet till you see the performance of each person in that new seat that they got, because we got Yuki in the Red Bull. I'm pulling it up. Right now it seems that Yuki is coming in at 16.8 million and Liam Lawson at 8.4 million. I think for now hold off on Yuki. Let's see first how he performs. But Lawson, look at practice. I don't expect him to be bad back in that race with Bulls, because he is very familiar. So that might be an opportunity to gain some budget and points. Now, it was a disaster for anyone who used Limitless, because more than likely you would have had at least two Ferrari assets, one of the Ferrari drivers and the constructor, and you got those disqualification negatives. So that was rough. For those who saved their Limitless, let's get it. This is our current leaderboard. I don't remember seeing Max owns it in week one. I don't know if they joined after. But in first place with 372 points, we have Mark Mohammed with his team. Props to that. Then we have Dan Stappen, big name, and your boy in third. Kosi, I had a big up your comment on the last video. You're in fourth. But you gotta stay behind us, so hard luck there. Alistair, Toto Stroke kind of dropped down the ranks there and moved into 7th. So let me see if you can pick that back up. Now, I will leave what to expect in Japan for next week's episode. We'll give it some time to get some more news. We'll wait on practice one at least and see exactly what happens. But let's see if Ferrari can recover first of all. Make sure they don't make any blunders like they did. And let's see if Yuki can perform in that Red Bull. Don't know what to expect. I hope he does well, but we don't know. That is a big question mark. I will show the current driver's standings. Now, this is wild. Stroll is on top of both Hamilton and Leclerc, both Ferrari drivers. Blows my mind. I don't think anybody would have believed that before the season started. Very strong from the Mercedes. In my mind, Russell, Antonelli in 5th, Albon doing very well in that Williams. I think Sainz again needs a little bit more time, but props to them. Norris still in first, but Piastri creeping up. I think it shows how good Verstappen is, because that car seems to be an absolute disaster and he's in second. Again, just the second race. We move to the team standings. Williams scored more points in their first 2 races than they did, I think, for the entirety of last season. So amazing for them. They are also equal on points with Ferrari. Crazy. And Alpine is the only team currently to not score any points. A bit rough for them right now. Tough start to life in F1 for Jack Doohan. I hope he can redeem himself, and Alpine does have a very slow car. Haas has been overperforming in my mind, but Williams as well. I think Albon doing well. Sainz has a lot to catch up on. So let's see how things pan out next week. I will get more in depth with what to expect in Japan, but thank you very much for tuning in. This is episode 8 of F1 Fridays, and I will see you next week.